Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Probably should turn on a little bit of light for me. We are going to get started here in just a second and let a couple more people. I can't tell if there's anybody else in the waiting room. Wait just one more minute and then we will kick this off. Okay, so light is not good apparently. Makes me look cloudy. Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon. Welcome to Supervision and Support of Youth and Parent Peer Support Providers, Best Practices and Lessons from the Field. We're glad that everyone could join us today. A quick disclaimer, this presentation was prepared for INTAC under our agreement with SAMHSA. So these are the opinions of INTAC and of the presenters and not necessarily official statement or official position of SAMHSA. And if there are any security issues that may pop up, the session will immediately end. And it will not resume using the same join link. A separate email will be sent. Hopefully, we will not have to have that happen. A little bit about INTAC. We have a multidisciplinary team. You can see here all of the partners that are involved in the National Training and Technical Assistance Center. A lot of depth in a lot of different areas that affect children and families. Our goal is that all children, youth, young adults, and families with or at risk for serious emotional disturbance or SMI can access evidence-based treatment and recovery services in a well-coordinated system of care. This is an example of our cross-sector audiences. We work with, provide support to technical assistance and training for state and local agency leaders, the mental health workforce, primary care providers, the school workforce, community-based providers, peer supervisors, and family partners. I'd like to add youth peer support providers there as well. Our services are no-cost training, technical assistance, and resources in all these different areas. There's individual consultation, there's customized coaching. We do peer learning exchanges and training academies. We have communities of practice, podcasts, but there's also practical tools. We put out 5 Things digests, which are full of resources in very digestible small pieces. I am one of your presenters today. My name is Millie Sweeney. I'm the Deputy Director for FREDLA, which is the Family-Run Executive Director Leadership Association. We are a network of family-run organizations across the nation, and our goal is to support family-run organizations and together with them influence policy in the areas of children's mental health and to influence practice across a number of areas, including parent peer support. We are a proud partner in the National Training and Technical Assistance Center and are part of the community wellness and peer support team. Michelle?
Thank you. My name is Michelle Vance. I'm joining you guys from Salt Lake City, Utah. I work as a youth program specialist for Youth Move National. We're an organization that's nationwide, chapter-based, working on youth peer support, youth advocacy, all things for youth engagement. Really happy to be a part of the NTAC team, share our work with peer support with you guys today.
Thanks, Michelle. Here's what we're going to be covering. We're going to be focusing on effective supervision of both youth peer support providers and parent peer support providers. And our objectives are that hopefully you'll learn more about the scope of activities and the roles for this unique and valuable workforce, and that you'll have a better understanding of best practices in supervising and supporting this workforce, including some effective approaches and some coaching structures. And that you're going to learn strategies from the field on how youth and parent peer support providers can work together and can collaborate and honor both the youth and parent voices when they're working together within the same families. We want to start off, though, by asking you, before we go into the information that we have to share today, what questions do you have about supervising this workforce, or what would you like to learn? If you would type those in the chat box, Michelle's going to read them off. It takes a minute for people to type in.
We got a response from Kimberly, who says pretty much everything we've highlighted in the overview, particularly interested, and we got the chat box scrolling out of my view, particularly interested in models and the styles of supervision. Whitney says, what kind of extra trainings would be beneficial for youth peer supports? What about training for youth peer support supervisors? Besides this one, of course.
Those are good questions. And actually, we're going to cover that, but we also want to make sure we leave time at the end to have any discussion or answer any questions and to talk about some of the next steps that we've thought about that could be helpful to you. And we want to see if there are things that we can do to continue to support you. So we are going to go ahead and dive in.
One other comment just before you move on is just wanting to understand better the balance between peer-to-peer coaching and clinical supervision, which I feel is something we're also going to cover today as well.
Absolutely.
So I'll just keep going since this is my slide here. So youth peer support providers and parent peer providers are a unique workforce. Next. Youth peer support is a peer-delivered service that is designed to support youth and young adults through shared activities and interventions in the form of direct support, information sharing, and skill building. Some key service components of youth peer support are skill building, which includes coping, managing symptoms, navigating services, how to set goals and interact with people in the community, coaching, which is a model of to do with and help them do on their own. This includes things like youth peer providers modeling how to deal with stigma or how to feel hopeful in spite of some of the challenges that we're facing. We've seen great success with youth peer support providers who engage young adults in transition planning, especially young adults who receive services or for other transitions in their life, school, going off to college, building your career. Another key service component for youth peer support providers is supporting self-advocacy. So helping youth, helping young adults articulate needs, work with people to get their needs met, and how to be successful independently. Youth peer providers can also be supportive in building up young adults' natural supports. So for those youth who feel disconnected, youth peer advocates can help young people get back into a sense of community, connect with people that they might not normally connect with. Something that's unique to youth peer support in this field of work is it might be possible that this is a young adult's first job or their first professional job. They may need additional information around wellness, around self-care, and other types of professional development information. Next. I want to kind of go over some of the scope of activities for youth peer support providers because we think, it really can look a lot of different ways. Youth peer support providers can center the youth's voice in a team process. So teams meetings, care plan creation, again, transition assistance, transition planning. They can ensure the focus remains centered on a young person, offering hope, building skills, and sharing lived experience directly with the youth and in team spaces. They can assist the youth in preparing for the team process. They can offer to debrief and follow up, creating support aftercare plans, helping them even revise after the meetings. They can help youth to coordinate in friendly, professional, and strength-based ways with all the other team members. Youth peer support providers work alongside youth to identify natural or informal supports that would benefit joining the team or joining the youth and identifying a smaller team. Youth and parent peers model positive relationships for youth and families served. They support the creation of a care plan, and they support care coordination across services.
So let me define parent peer support for you. Parent peer support is provided by caregivers who have been trained to use their own lived experiences in parenting a child or youth with emotional and behavioral challenges to support other parents and families. This work is based on that specific life experience, not a degree. So a parent can be a biological parent. It can be a foster parent. It can be a grandparent who has custody. It's someone who has that primary caregiving experience. Parent peer support providers strengthen families by enhancing their abilities, their capacity, and their skill sets. They provide support, training, and building bridges between families and providers for better outcomes. They enhance the resiliency of both the individual and the family by facilitating the family's identification of services, coaching family through navigating very complex systems, and sharing their own experiences with navigating systems and building resilience. They fulfill a variety of roles that facilitate effective connections between families, service providers, and systems. Parent peer support is not the same as adult peer support, although a lot of states tend to start with adult peer support and then kind of build on from there. They are different. The same can probably be said for youth peer support. Parent peer support is different in that while there's still a need for confidentiality, there's still a need for ethical behavior and basic knowledge of mental health that's necessary for both adult and parent. Their daily work, the needs they address, and the situations they encounter are significantly different. They're not the same type of service or workforce, and each has their own set of competencies, skills, and specific training needs. The same is true for youth peer support, although it's a bit more closely related to adult peer support because you're using your, I'm not a big fan of the term consumer, but a consumer to consumer experience instead of a caregiver to caregiver about a child or an adolescent who has an emotional or behavioral challenge. Adult peer support is characterized by lived experience as someone who is receiving behavioral health services, and it's more of a relationship of mutuality. The focus is on the individual as an independent person who's living in recovery. And the focus is on adult mental health and physical health systems, vocational goals, housing, sometimes even the adult court system. Parent or family peer support is where it's called in a lot of places, is differentiated from adult or youth peer support in that the support is provided to the caregivers rather than to the children who are experiencing the behavioral health challenges. A parent peer support provider has received specific training on using their own experiences to inform, support, and to guide other caregivers and families. They assist parents in navigating child serving systems, and sometimes they have to help them navigate the adult system as well. Another differentiating factor is that parent peer support is oriented to building resiliency rather than being focused on recovery. SAMHSA defines resilience as an individual's ability to cope with adversity and adapt to challenges or change. Resilience develops over time and gives a person the capacity not only to cope with life's challenges, but also to be better prepared for the next stressful situation, the next transition, or the next crisis. Optimism and the ability to remain hopeful are essential to resilience and to the process of recovery. Increasing resiliency skills and promoting protective factors are integral to children and youth becoming adults who are not as affected by their experiences with emotional and behavioral substance abuse or mental health symptoms or disorders. Kids are not little adults. They're still in the process of developing and growing their brains. And that's why we do focus on resiliency rather than addressing recovery. Lastly, parent peer support providers work with the entire family, often addressing the needs of more than one child in the family or the medical or behavioral health needs of the parents. Often, a parent peer support worker may assist the family with stable housing, employment, or other healthcare issues. Thus, their training and their supervision needs are different than those of adult peer support providers, although there are a few common training areas, like I mentioned, confidentiality, documentation, that they're going to share. Parent peer support providers offer a variety of supports. So listed here are the basic scope of activities. And I believe everyone got a copy of this slide as well. But this lists some of the main things that they do. They provide that empathetic listening and emotional support. As I mentioned before, they navigate systems that are very complex, the child serving system, as well as sometimes the adult system. They supply information and education about those systems, about basic behavioral health and development, connecting with community resources. They do provide advocacy. And a lot of people think advocacy is a bad word. But what they do is they teach parents how to build collaborative relationships with providers. And they help providers understand the parent perspective and the expertise that the parent's bringing to the table about their child. They encourage self-care activities. They also help them by modeling a lot. They model collaboration between families and professionals. They model advocacy skills. They model self-care skills. They model boundaries. They engage in safety and care planning, and they help explore and eliminate barriers to care. Any of the follow through. There's a lot of barriers sometimes to a family following through with appointments or with treatment recommendations. And they help identify what those barriers are and eliminate them, working both with the family and with a professional. And they offer a lot of skill building for parents that enhances resiliency and communication and any other areas that affect their ability to maintain a child with complex needs in the home, in the school, and the community. Now, this caregiver to caregiver approach is provided in a lot of different settings, but it's really important to note, and I noticed in some of the comments, that parent peer support and youth peer support, they're not clinical services, but they are complementary to other services. They enhance the work of the family and other providers on the family's team. A parent peer support provider does serve the whole family. The work is community-based and it meets families where they are physically, emotionally, and logistically. Parent peer support is strength-based rather than deficit-based, helping a family to identify their strengths and use those to address their needs and to build resilience. This graph that you see right now is from a larger infographic that outlines the potential roles of parent peer support providers across the range of service intensity levels. So there was a question about scope of practice and the different ways that they fit into services. This is a great visual for showing that. Parent peer support providers can be and are part of all levels of service delivery, from the least intense that you can see here in sort of that raspberry color, like education, information and referral, doing community outreach through health fairs, that type of thing, to the most intense, which will be all the way over here to the blue color, where they are involved in and employed to be part of teams in hospitals, in residential treatment, in intensive in-home services. I believe the same type of roles exist for youth peer support providers as well. They can support youth across all intensity levels and participate as valued members of treatment teams. So although the title and the responsibilities may be different for each one of those roles, keep in mind that the core competencies and that parent-to-parent approach is consistent. Both youth and parent peer support are critical services that can be provided within any child serving system as a standalone service, not just as an enhancement to other service models such as wraparound. Traditionally, youth and parent peer support have been funded through grants and foundation monies, but that's changing to more diversified funding, including Medicaid. It's now a billable service in 30 plus states, and even private insurance. So now you've heard a little bit about what they do and what they are. Let's discuss some of the best practices of supervision in this very unique workforce. First of all, there are basically two types of supervision, administrative and programmatic. Administrative supervision focuses on performance. It focuses on policy and procedure. That's where you're making sure that timesheets are turned in, that their scheduling, working with families is in place. It can be training, it can be strategic planning. Then there's programmatic supervision, and that focuses on the actual service and support delivery. Any programmatic issues, it can be case-specific planning, it can be strategy in an approach, and you usually see that as clinical supervision, peer supervision, or a mixture of both. Best practice for both of the workforce we're talking today, youth and parent peer support, is peer supervision with clinical consultation. We're going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like. For parent peer support providers in particular, and Michelle's going to talk about youth peer support here in just a second, best practice is peer supervision with access to clinical consultation on a regular basis. Peer supervision means supervision that's provided by a seasoned parent peer support provider, and staff have access to regular consultation with someone who's clinically trained around complex family needs. Each one of these types of supervision involves specific components for the parent peer support provider. So for peer supervision, the focus is on the role of the parent professional in working with the family and in maintaining that role and that identity. Peer supervision helps prioritize tasks to address the needs of a family and explores how that's impacting the parent peer support provider. How are they feeling about issues that are faced by the family? And if it's close to something that they have been through themselves. And then there may need to be supports available if it does trigger something. Peer supervision also identifies family and parent peer support provider strengths in reaching families' goals, in a plan that's developed, and also brainstorming ideas. Clinical consultation has a focus on therapeutic issues dealing with the family, diagnosis, clinical impressions, safety issues. A clinical consultant, a master's level or higher, can assist the parent peer support provider in understanding the therapeutic picture and how it relates to goals or actions that they're seeing, behaviors, how it may relate to barriers or the strengths that are there. It helps expand the knowledge of the parent peer support provider in terms of diagnoses, treatment modalities, that sort of thing. Again, parent peer support providers are not clinical, but they do work with clinically involved families. So it's important that they do have that oversight and they do have that access to clinical supervision, as well as supervision from someone who has been there and done that in the field. I often say, you know, if you are going to have surgery and you go to talk to a surgeon, who is that surgeon's supervisor? It's another surgeon. If you have someone to come work on the plumbing in your house, who supervises that plumber? It's another plumber. It's someone who has that experience in that role. And there's lots of reasons for that. So there's many ways to structure supervision for this workforce. It can be individual, group, co-supervision happens. You know, if they're working with like in a wraparound situation, and there's a care coordinator, or if they're working with a clinical person in an in-home situation, you can have co-supervision. All formats have their merits. It really just depends on what your agency's approach is. There's lots of ways to operationalize this blend of clinical and peer supervision. For example, you can hire or contract with a clinician for ongoing consultation with the team if you don't have a clinician on staff. You can hire clinicians that are also parents, so they have both experience in parent peer support and clinical interventions, or who have been youth peer support providers in the past. You can provide clinical consultation as a group, but do peer supervision individually. Or you can use internal clinical staff for consultation and contract with a youth or family-run organization for that peer supervision. There's a number of ways that you can operationalize that.
Perfect. And then here at Youth Move National, we think of supervision topics in 3 different buckets: admin, clinical, and coaching. So admin refers to things like timesheets, leave policy, grievances, HR. Clinical includes individual supervision, as well as group supervision and co-reflection with other youth peer providers. We think that that's very important. Coaching is similar to what Millie was talking about earlier, referring to that ongoing support for professional development skills. Areas of coaching that can be helpful, especially for youth peer providers, are topics like facilitation skills, strategic sharing, or time management. Often with Medicaid billable peer support, we see 3 types of supervision, and all include clinical, since it's a requirement of Medicaid. However, even if you're not Medicaid billable, we suggest that your peers have access to clinical support and that perspective regularly. So same thing that Millie's talking about. We're talking about big things that are affecting the youth, and they deserve that support when they're supporting others. So what I want to do is let's review some of the supervision models that we see currently being used for youth peer providers. We have clinical and a parent peer. This is where a clinician for regular supervision, and we have a parent peer who offers additional coaching and support. We also have the model of a clinical supervision and also having a coach. So the coach would be a non-peer who supports the development of skills and the ongoing practice to hone them. So someone who's providing, again, that additional ongoing support in a coaching model. But the difference between a parent peer or a senior peer in this model is the coach doesn't have that lived experience. The last one, again, mirroring exactly what Millie said, is we prefer this model. Ideally, this is what we would like to see. Agencies creating workforce pathways so that youth peer providers, once they gain mastery and experience in youth peer support, that they're promoted to senior peer roles where they can supervise and coach other youth peer providers. So we're creating a ladder by building this model. They offer the lived experience perspective, the youth lived experience perspective, and the transition to a new career perspective. So this is all around going to just strengthen your workforce. And just, again, remember that lived experience enhances all aspects of your agency, not just the peer force. I'm going to have you go to the next slide for me, please, Nellie. So here we have some different models of providing peer supervision. We're just going to continue to go on this. So outside of the ideas that we've already talked about, right? Hiring a peer supervisor, contracting, again, just like Millie said, with a youth or family run organization to offer that peer supervision. We've worked with very small peer support teams who maybe only have 1 or 2 youth peer providers. And so creating that ladder at that time maybe isn't possible. And so reaching out and connecting with other organizations is also something that's very recommended, something that we would really push and support. Again, co-supervision with a clinical and a peer supervisor team. So we can do this in a team model. We can do this one-on-one as well. We want to use a developmental approach to supervision. So this is going to promote professional growth. It's going to allow for learning from mistakes, and it provides opportunities for individuals to use their strengths. In this, you're going to want to offer specific training to the supervisors who are working with youth peer support providers and the parent peer support providers. And lastly, we're going to want to create pathways for peers to become supervisors to take on those senior peer roles.
So Michelle just covered some of the strategies that are effective in supervising and supporting youth and parent peer support providers. If you want to recruit and retain this workforce, it's important to keep in mind the type of things that encourage employees to remain and thrive in an organization. Here you see employees stay when they are paid well. In this case, there should be equity in payment across the types of peer support providers and for the valuable work they do with families, youth, and community partners. They need to be mentored. We're going to talk a little bit more about the developmental approach in a second, but having someone that they can shadow initially is an effective strategy in helping someone get settled into a job and be able to grow professionally. They like to be challenged. Provide opportunities for them to stretch into new roles, to learn and use new skills, and to advance professionally. Ongoing training is absolutely critical for the workforce we're talking about. And they are like sponges. They like to just soak up all the knowledge they can and learn something new constantly. Promoted. It's important to develop a career ladder and professional opportunities for this workforce as they grow and mature in their field, including into management roles and supervision roles. Employees stay when they're involved. This workforce are amazing problem solvers. They've had to learn how to do these things on their own a lot of times, navigate systems, come up with coping strategies. They're amazing problem solvers. So involve them in internal and external decision-making roles, as part of an advisory group in any of your continuous quality improvement. They should be appreciated and valued, especially for the expertise they bring to the table and having equity as a team member within your organization. Employees stay when they are on and part of a mission. This workforce is mission driven. It's more of a passion for them as opposed to a job. It's more than a profession. It becomes part of who they are, part of their identity. Empowered with resources, learning opportunities, and support, and finally trusted to do their jobs well and to do them in a professional manner. As a supervisor for this workforce, this is your role. First of all, understanding how youth and parent professionals operate in various systems, because what you will do is constructively channel their passion in those areas. That requires additional training, focused training, like in the area of advocacy, being assertive as opposed to aggressive, but understanding exactly what youth and parent peer support providers do as they begin work with a youth or a family, all the way through the time that they transition them to ongoing services or out of your program. What they do every day, what they run into, and the type of skills they need. There are times that you'll have to balance a dual role. You're an authority figure, but you also tend to be an informal support. Now, I want to caution you here. Informal support does not mean you're their therapist. I have been involved with a site that there was a fantastic supervisor of transition support specialists, which were young adults who were supporting other young adults. And supervision became therapy sessions, and it caused the rest of the program to not see those young adults as professionals, but as those that needed to receive services. And so you have to be careful. You're an informal support, but you're not the therapist. And so once that was recognized and we got that kind of cleared up, it became much better. But you have to be careful that some of your staff will have emotional and behavioral needs that need to be addressed on an ongoing basis. Your goal is to make sure there's a supportive environment where they can say, okay, I need some help here, and you have a place to connect them to. Um, they will have to balance care for their children with the workplace needs. When I first began doing supervision and moved from a mental health center to a family run organization, some of my colleagues, because I'm clinically trained, but I'm also a parent, some of my colleagues said, "Oh, you're going to be supervising parents, and that's going to be difficult, and they're hard to corral." And I thought, let me see how this goes, and I took on the role. It's my favorite thing I've ever done. I learned more from them than I ever did in grad school, and I feel like I was able to bring a balance there, um, to what their lived experience was at the table. There were times they need to take care of their children, but you find that in any workplace. The only difference is I knew ahead of time that there would be times that that was needed, and had to create a place where they felt comfortable coming forward with that. So having that supportive workplace environment, it's not just supportive, it's productive. When you support, then you have that production. Effective supervisors for this workforce are passionate about system of care, that whole approach that is about partnering with youth and families. They're also passionate about the role of the parent and the caregiver and the youth in their own treatment. Effective supervisors are available and they're trustworthy. They are supportive of a parent peer support provider as an employee and as a parent, and of the youth peer support provider as an employee and a young adult in recovery who's still continuing to grow and learn. They offer guidance, information, and especially opportunities for growth. There are very clear expectations. You hold them to a professional standard. This is a professional role. And there's follow through on anything that you say you're going to do to support them, or to follow up with them, to check in, to continue to nudge them in their growth. I want you to consider, however, all of these things. You're going to run into this with any employee. It's really your approach in how you address these things that set you apart and makes you a successful supervisor of those with lived experience, using that in a professional way. First and foremost, you want to empower your team. You want to start with viewing lived experience as an asset and as expertise. It's critical to point out that your peer staff already have skills that are valued by you and by your organization. You want to empower them to see themselves as experts in this field and have equity at the table, and partnering with families and other professionals for the best outcomes. So empower them to realize that their experience as a youth, as a parent, as a family member, they have lived it 24/7. And that's not something that they can learn in a class. They have experience in navigating the system. They've learned how to work through procedures and processes, and they've made contacts within that system that will benefit other families. They also have experience as consumers of the services of the system, so they can provide a customer's view that's valuable to systems administrators. They need your feedback for continued funding, program improvement, and development. You have a valuable voice and a valuable experience that can help provide more quality services. And finally, their passion for a change. This is more than a job, so the commitment level is very different. I mentioned that a minute ago. They tend to be more consistent and persistent to make things better for other families and youth and for their colleagues. And why is it important that you have them see themselves as experts? It's because the greatest challenge for youth and parent peer support providers is the perception of peer professionals in the field. The most common way you can champion this workforce is to challenge negative perceptions of young adults, parents, and peer professionals, starting with your own team and your own organization. Be a champion for peer support, both in your organization and in the community, with other professionals and with other systems.
Youth peer support providers and parent peer providers are often still living their lived experience. They may still struggle with accessing services or with their own recovery. This doesn't mean that they're unable to help others in a similar situation. We need organizational policies that reflect the expertise and experience of this workforce. If someone is hired for their lived experience, they should not be penalized for when it occurs. Next slide.
A very successful strategy, and this was mentioned before, is employing a developmental approach. Some people may have heard of this approach before. Some people do this naturally. It's an approach that is good for any workforce, to be honest. It's not just the peer workforce, but it's viewing supervision as the process by which an individual grows professionally. It's a growth process. Parent peer support providers may be new to the professional mental health world, and they'll need opportunities to learn. Parent peer support providers come from everywhere. On my team, I've had PhD level staff. I have had those that worked on an assembly line. I have those that have worked in school systems who were former educators at the university level, at the elementary school level. They come from everywhere, but they may not have worked in the mental health field. So I learned how to do documentation in grad school. We have to teach them the things that we learned in a structured educational setting. There's going to be things that they realize that they don't realize are incorrect. So it's your job to help them identify these, to coach them to improve performance, and to grow as a professional. I love this graphic because it illustrates how you learn. So a parent peer support provider or a youth peer support provider may be unaware that they're getting something wrong. And so you have to help them realize that. And then they have to realize that they got it wrong. And then they have to get it right. And then in order to continue to get it right, you have to keep doing it so you get it right without thinking about it. It's how we all learn. Another part of the developmental approach is you reframe disciplinary actions. You reframe performance issues as opportunities for growth and reflection. And so the way you do that is when you're addressing performance issues, it should always be based on behaviors, not on characteristics of someone's personality. Some of this will seem like common sense to you, but if you've ever had a supervisor who has done that, and maybe there's, you don't have to be friends to work effectively with somebody, but you need to focus on the behavior, not the person. You need to convey that there are issues when you first see them. If someone is getting something incorrect, or there's a better way to do something, or your expectation is different than what's happening, say something then, right at the beginning. The other thing about this workforce is they do love to learn. They love feedback. They want feedback. They want to continue to grow and to be better in their work professionally. When you first address a performance issue, say what you notice and what you'd like to see instead, not just what's wrong. It's like me telling my kids, be good today. What does good mean? What does that look like? Don't be bad. What does bad look like? You need to be very specific as to what is not at the expectation level and what would be at that expectation level. Make sure you consider special circumstances, and then make sure that there is an opportunity for them to fix it, to practice getting it right, just like it is in this graphic here. They need to have the opportunity to do it enough times in order to get it right before they're really penalized. It's a growth process.
The trauma-informed approach is an approach to engaging people with histories of trauma that recognizes the presence of trauma symptoms and acknowledges the role that trauma has played in their life. Next. Obviously, we're going to advocate for this, right? Peer support supervision that uses a trauma-informed approach. It moves from invalidation of personal reality and moves towards the validation of personal reality. It moves from mistrust and alienation towards trust and connection. We move from a loss of power and control towards gaining personal power and control. It moves from helplessness and hopelessness towards self-efficacy and hopefulness. It empowers someone who feels voiceless to move towards having a voice that is heard and understood. Peer support supervision that uses a trauma-informed approach moves away from practices that make someone feel dominated, controlled, or manipulated towards practices that help someone feel in control of their self. It also moves away from the violation of personal boundaries and sense of safety that come along with establishing personal boundaries. We are going to move the conversation from seeing symptoms to seeing coping strategies. We're going to move away from a loss of meaning towards a creation of sense of meaning and purpose. And last, a trauma-informed approach moves from having a sense of your safety violated to creating a safe and consistent place. It's all about trust. It's all about safety. Next.
So we know we only have an hour, so we're trying to touch on some of the things that are important, and we want to get to talking about some next steps for maybe some further support for you guys in working with this unique workforce. But here are the basic areas of supervision. There are 3 of them that you will need to focus on when you are supervising youth and parent peer support providers. You will have the youth or family work, the casework. You will have performance, and then you will have professional growth. Those are the 3 areas. So just the basics in the family or the youth work, that's about addressing the needs of enrolled youth and families. And that's where you're reviewing priorities for tasks and activities. You're getting updates on the progress toward goals, and you're addressing any barriers related to accomplishing those goals. This is often done in group or individual supervision. It may also include checking charts, making sure that documentation is done, and helping them plan and brainstorm around barriers. This also may be where something comes up that's really close to their own experiences, and it may be causing some unease or some anxiety. This is where you would have the opportunity to be able to say, how's that going with you? To do a check-in to see if they need any additional support, because you are asking them to use very personal lived experience in a professional way. The only other group that does this, I think, are probably comics, stand-up comedians who use their personal life in a professional way. It's not easy to do that strategically. So some of the things you can do is be proactive. Make sure that they are trained well, that there are policies in place, policies and procedures in your program, and that there are supportive policies in place in the organization, and that you are available for coaching them through situations. You want to ensure that there is an environment for learning when mistakes occur, and be willing to adjust your approach and your process to fit the unique situations that are encountered by a peer workforce. Supervise and mentor the peer support providers as they implement skills, and then train and train again. Performance. The basics there are setting expectations. Those include your tangible job tasks, your administrative items, what a performance evaluation looks like, documentation and accountability, observing and giving feedback, documenting your supervision, making sure that they have clarity on what your expectations are. And then we talked a little bit about disciplinary actions, reframing those as opportunities for growth, and using performance improvement plans, really addressing the issues as behaviors, not characteristics, and then making sure that they have a clear pathway for learning to do something different. And then third is that professional growth. Constantly assess training needs. You can do this in supervision by seeing, a trend of the types of issues that families they're working with are running into. That could be an area that they might benefit from more training in. Or I had a person who was fantastic with families, but just was horrible with the documentation and the writing, grammatical areas. It wasn't professional. And so, we had this person go through a writing course and we paid for it as part of their professional development, took care of it just like that. And so we're able to build on some of the strengths and help address the challenges that the staff have, a lot like what you do when you're working with families. Assess those strengths and build on those. If there is someone that does well in sharing their story, have them begin to be a co-presenter, in talking to a decision-making group. If they're good at breaking down things with families to teach them skills, they might be a really good trainer. What could you get them certified in? Common sense parenting, strengthening families. There's a lot of evidence-based curricula out there that is even more powerful when it's provided by a family member to family members. It could be an area of growth for them. Track their professional development, have a training log, scan certificates of completion, keep a copy of those certificates in their personnel file to show their growth. There are areas for repetition in training, boundaries, not because this workforce doesn't have good boundaries, but because they're there for their passion. And they need a reminder sometimes about staying in that zone of helpfulness, not becoming over-involved or under-involved. And they run into some pretty interesting situations in the field that you probably would not be prepared for. So sometimes that's going to happen. So boundaries, enabling versus empowering, documentation, and self-care. They're always the one, I guarantee, in their family that takes care of everybody else and doesn't take care of themselves. And so sometimes you have to remind them of that. Your most valuable resource for parent peer support are family-run organizations, or what we call FROs. They've been providing parent peer support for decades, and they've got valuable expertise in training, coaching, and supervising this unique workforce. They can be strategic partners in all phases of implementation of parent peer support. There's a link on the slide that provides a listing of family-run organizations that are sorted by SAMHSA region. And the full list is available for download as one of the resources in the last couple of slides that you received. So we knew that it was important to have competency-based training for both parent peer support providers and their supervisors. And so we at Fredla pulled together a listing of training curricula that's available across the country, that's developed and offered by family-run organizations. So that's also listed in the resources as well as on the slide. The same is true for youth-run organizations. They can provide competency training and support for youth peer support providers and their supervisors. They can assist you in building youth peer programming and offer technical assistance in becoming more youth-driven in your approach. Michelle's going to put a link in, oh, you already did it. Put a link in the chat box for the Youth Move chapters so you can connect with a chapter in your area or your state. You have expertise in your own backyard as well as in tech. You can always reach out to us.
Collaboration between youth and parent peer support providers when working with the same family is crucial. Next. So some tips from the field on collaboration within the same family unit. I'm going to speed this up a little bit so we have some time for questions here at the end. Just a good wrap up as well. So some tips: co-training when possible and joint competencies, communication skills, other topics, as well as procedures for working within the same home at the same time that promote supporting practices for both the parent and youth. So we want to avoid waiting until something conflicting or something potentially negative happening, and developing those procedures, developing that process ahead of time to protect the people that are working for us. We want to develop and implement processes that promote collaboration in different aspects of the working family. strengths discovery, planning to reach goals in both programs and in both parts of the agency. Opportunities for joint supervision on case-related issues. We want to have training on both parent and young adult perspectives, culture and relationship evolution, the dynamics between parent and youth or young adults, and equipping them with tools to use in managing conflict. Again, also conflict resolution training and processes, protocols for this workforce. Next. We keep saying this over and over again because it's so true. This is more than a job for peer staff. It's a passion. We want to help grow this passion in strategic planning, opportunities to grow and advance. We want to channel the passion by providing appropriate supervision and a supportive workplace environment. We want to value the passion of this workforce by providing fair wages and policies, respect for the role and their expertise.
Okay, so I know that we are running close on time, but we wanted to have an opportunity if there were any questions. That I didn't see any just yet in the chat box. But if you have questions, you can put it in the chat box, or if you want to unmute. We also wanted to ask a question. I'm going to stop sharing my slides here for a minute so that we can talk directly to you. This is an area, supervision, that there's not a whole lot out there on unless you've been doing this type of work. And so we can pull that from the field. Wanted to ask if you want to learn more about this. This was just an overview. 60 minutes doesn't get it. You know, if you do want more information about supervising this unique workforce, how do you want that information? And about what? I mean, are we talking like office hours? Do you want to have conversations where, you know, we talk about particular topics around supervision, affinity group meetings that we focus on supervising youth and or parent peer support providers? How can we help you? So
I kind of like the thought of the affinity groups. I participate on those, and I do respect and enjoy the opportunity to kind of have smaller groups and a breakout and really kind of talk through and brainstorm through it. And also kind of get an opportunity for like brag and stills, you know, and just kind of hear how other people are doing it across state. So I really enjoy that concept. I am one that is interested in more. I used to be a project director who I kind of feel like I often went rogue sometimes because the way you say it, this has to be a passion, and it has to be a passion for supervising. And not everybody has it, you know, and so sometimes that means having to step outside of that box. And so I'm very interested in this concept, and so please mark me as one to get more of those interests. But my recommendation, I like the affinity group.
Great. Let's see. I see Barb. Supervision trainings would be wonderful, as well as maybe peer support for groups for supervisors to come together and share. Absolutely.
And then we have a question above from Shelby as well, pretty much wondering if the family partner and the parents that they're working with have different experience. So the example that they used was experience with reunification in foster care system versus that adoptive perspective.
Mm-hmm. I would say that that's a training issue. Competency training should be foundational so that regardless of what role you go into or what family you work with, you have learned to strategically use your story. Only pull out the pieces that are inspiring hope, that are validating, or that are showing an understanding. You should be able to, after you've done some work and had some training, to be able to connect with just about any family member. You always want to try to connect with families with parent peer support providers who have similar experiences, but that can also backfire because it could be very close to something that they're not quite done with yet, and that could cause issues on their end. So I think it's a matter of training overall, and how you would guide someone in doing that is talking through where the points of contention are so that you can find the points of connection. What you can connect with that family on, what you can bring to the table in terms of experiences.
And then just to kind of add on to that, something here in Utah that we've done with our youth peer support providers is just when they're having a conflict or when they're having they don't see their perspective lining up with the young adult they're working with, we ask them to kind of focus on transition planning, focus on some of the information and resources we do with, I don't want to use the word clients, but that's the only word that's coming to my mind right now. But sitting through and doing some of those workshops or those kind of worksheets, a lot of that planning and staying really focused on goals. So what is the goal? How can you help this person regardless of maybe what your perspective is, especially if it's something that possibly conflicts. And that was really helpful for us to just redirect that conversation. How can you help this person to move forward? It doesn't have to be about you. It's not about you. It's about moving their life forward.
And working within their belief system in their situation.
Definitely.
I
We're
realize
about, yeah,
that we're over time, yeah, but
yeah.
are there
I was just
any
gonna
other
say that.
questions or I wanted to real quickly close up because there's some things that are coming up. Let me share my screen again. 1 second. I have to find my I apologize, my toolbar disappeared. There it is. Those are the resources.
Yes, and this is what we'll be sending out to all the participants afterwards. These are the upcoming events we have for the NTAC team. And then again, we're planning, later on, further down the line in this grant, 9 months later, what topics we can offer and how we can be supportive to this field. So again, follow up. I know we're a little short on time here. Please reach out to us. Please reach out to the NTAC team. If you think that there's a topic on this peer support, supervising peer support, that would be helpful to you.
And don't forget the brief survey that is in the chat box right now. Only takes a second to fill it out, but we really do pay attention to the information and we use it.
And just thank you so much for attending. We really appreciate everyone giving us an hour of their time. Please follow up with us. Please take that survey. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.